Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall. I am the event coordinator at Murder by the Book here in Houston, and we will get started with our authors, Ann Hillerman and Miranda James, in just a minute. But before we do, we know it takes a couple seconds for everybody to get the notifications that the events have gone live and to come find us from Facebook and YouTube. So while we're waiting for everybody to come join us, I'll do just a couple of quick store announcements. So first, I wanted to mention that the store is open for browsing. We reopened at the end of October. Somehow, not everybody has got that memo yet, but we are open and we would love to see you. We're still limiting it to 6 people in the store at a time just because it's a small space and we want everybody to feel comfortable socially distanced. But please come see us. We're open Monday through Saturday from 10 to 6. This Saturday is Independent Bookstore Day, and we are super excited. We've got some Independent Bookstore Day exclusive merchandise we'll be selling. We'll be giving away some free mugs with $100 purchases. But we're also really excited at 1 o'clock this Saturday. We're going to be partnering with the Mystery Writers of America to host a panel for all of the authors that were nominated for Best Novel this year. So that's going to be a really fun discussion. So I hope that you guys will come see us. You can't come see us on Saturday. Every day is Independent Bookstore Day for us, so we hope you'll come check us out. As I mentioned, we're open, but if you're still not comfortable coming in yet, we're still doing curbside. We're still available online. So for those of you who might be joining us often, you will notice that I have a new backdrop behind me. My husband and I have spent the last week repainting my library. I got new bookcases, so I now have like an actual space. Usually when I would do these virtual events, I would just be sitting on the floor at my coffee table in the living room. So I'm now actually in my brand new library. My one pro tip is do not try to remodel a room in your house while you have jury duty. It's a whole lot. You'll just be tired. Don't do it. I don't recommend it at all. But so I'm super excited to be in our new library. A couple other brief announcements. We haven't had any issues in a couple weeks, but if I don't say it, I'm sure they'll happen. Sometimes we've got some people that will pop up posting spam comments. It'll ask you to click away from the event to put in your credit card info to watch that. If any of those pop up, don't do that. You don't have to click away from the event to give anybody your credit card to watch the event. It's free here on Facebook and YouTube. And we're so excited for you guys to join us this evening. I'm going to bring out our authors. I'm going to start with Dean James, who also writes as Miranda James. How are you tonight, Dean?
Doing great.
Thanks for doing this for us.
Oh, I'm delighted to do this.
So for everybody watching, as I said, Dean James, he was the manager at Murder by the Book for many, many years. He writes as Miranda James, and Miranda James is the New York Times bestselling author of The Cat in the Stacks Mysteries and The Southern Ladies Mysteries. The most recent one is now out in paperback, but it is Cat Me If You Can. He will have a new one out a little bit later this year called Cat Dragged In, and you'll be able to pre-order signed copies from us. I'll drop some links, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But I was so excited when we got the email from Ann's publicist about being able to set up the event this evening. I immediately emailed Dean because he's a big Ann Hillerman and Tony Hillerman fan, and I'm so excited that he is going to be leading our chat with us tonight. So I'm going to bring out Ann. How are you tonight, Ann?
Just fine. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm excited to be able to talk to you guys.
Yeah, it's been
so. Everybody out there in Zoom land too.
So was it the first book in the series that you came to visit us in the store for?
Yeah, a long time ago.
It was, yeah.
There was a gal there who had been a friend of my mom's who drove all the way from Oklahoma. And the whole thing was just really lovely. So even though I can't be in Houston physically, I am very grateful for this opportunity.
We're so excited. Oh, thank you. So we're so excited to talk about Stargazer, which is your newest book. For those of you watching, Ann Hillerman is the author of the Leaphorn-Chee-Manuelito series. She began her career as a journalist and writer of nonfiction books. She's the daughter of New York Times bestselling author Tony Hillerman. She lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and this is her 6th novel and 24th in the Hillerman series. So while Ann and Dean chat tonight, if you guys have questions for either one of them, please post those in the comments. I'm going to let them chat for a little bit, and I'll be back a little bit later to relay any of those questions. So please post those comments on Facebook and YouTube, and I will get those and relay those to the authors. So Dean, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will see you guys in a little bit.
Thank you, John. Well, Ann, this is a great pleasure for me. I had to miss that event in 2013. I was still in Houston then, but I can't remember now, but I had a conflict, and I was not happy. But I finally get to meet you face to face, sort of. And
well, thank you. It's fun to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. I was a big fan of your father's. I think A Thief of Time is my favorite, although there are so many good ones, it's hard to pick. I mean, and when I saw that you were going to publish a new book in this series, of course, I was thinking, okay, this could go really, really well or not. And I, picked up the book and we got an advance copy and I started reading and I thought, this is going to be just fine. Immediately you pulled me in. You grew up with these characters. You knew them. And you grew up where they live and everything. And you're just as wonderful a storyteller as your father, I think.
Well, gosh,
I've been very, very impressed. And I think Stargazer may be the best one yet. So.
Well, that's what every author wants to hear.
Yes.
You always want to hear the book that you just finished is better than the ones that you wrote before. Otherwise, kind of what's the point?
Yeah, you don't want to be known as the person who wrote that really wonderful first novel. I went downhill. That's happened to some people. But anyway, your father passed away in 2008, and Spider-Woman's Daughter, the first book in the continuation, came out in 2013. Had you ever talked to your dad about writing his characters, or was this just something you decided you wanted to do?
No, I had never. I really could not imagine the world without my dad in it. And those characters were such a part of him. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, I'm the eldest of 6 kids, and we would always have family dinners. That was back in those old days when people did that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, we would always, talk about what had happened to each of us that day. How was basketball practice? How was science class? How was whatever? And my dad often would say, I really had a hard time with Jim today. It's like, yeah, we know Jim Chee. It's like those guys were really part of our family. So I think when I had been writing, I'd been doing journalism and writing nonfiction, and really the idea of switching over to fiction, it was maybe in the back of my head that it hadn't really gelled as a real idea. And then after my dad died, I had done a nonfiction book that was that talked about the places that he loved and mentioned in his novels. My late husband did photographs to go with the text. Anyway, I did talks kind of like this, except with people that you could look in the eyes and then in little boxes. And so often after I talked about my book, people would ask if Dad had another book, if there was something ready to be published, something that an editor could spruce up. And I would have to say, no, he really took care of business before he died. Yeah. And then the person asking that question would say, oh, I love those characters. I love that series. What about Jim Chee and Bernie? And what about Joe Leaphorn? And then they'd say, I'm just going to have to read them all over again. And I must have heard that 50 times. And it kind of, it helps me with my grief. And also it kind of planted the seed of an idea because I love those characters too.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, there's nothing I can do about my father not being around, but maybe there is something I could do to continue the stories. So I think I was in a position that so many writers who love a series, and then when the series ends, they want to continue it. I was in a little different position because having grown up with those characters, and hearing my dad talk about them, and then getting all of that tsunami of goodwill from people who had read my dad. All of that kind of helped me screw up my courage and make the switch from nonfiction to fiction.
Yes. Well, and as you talk about nonfiction, I mean, you were a very experienced writer already. I mean, you were a journalist like your father was. And I read something on your website, I think, that said that you wanted to be a writer from a very young age because you thought that was the thing to do. Probably because your father did it. But I think, your nonfiction, a lot of it's about New Mexico.
Right.
Corners area. And so I think, and you lived there. So you, I think, absorbed the setting the way your father did. And I think you have the same, I'm trying to think of the best word for it, the sensitivity to the setting and how it influences story and character that he did. And that was one of the remarkable things about his book, about the series. The land was as much a character as Joe Leaphorn or Jim Chee or Manuelito, that the land was there. And I think given the fact that we're talking about the Navajo, that is appropriate because you can't separate the two. The people in the land
Yeah.
are preferable, I think, to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much of so many of the landmarks in the Four Corners area that you or I would think is beautiful. Navajo people would not only think it's beautiful, but they would know the whole story
Yes.
that is tied to their tradition of how that came to be and what the holy people were thinking when they or meant when they created that and how it should affect their daily lives. It's almost like living surrounded by shrines or living surrounded. I grew up Catholic, so it would be like living surrounded by, say, the Vatican and Fatima and all of these sites that are sacred in the Catholic tradition.
Yeah. Well, and, the landscape itself, I've been to New Mexico, but it was like 43 years ago. And every time I read one of your dad's books, and now that when I read yours, I immediately want to get on the plane or get in the car and come to New Mexico. Because the stark beauty of it is just amazing. But I think one of the things that your father did and that you do also is that you show us the spirituality of the Navajo. I mean, Joe Leaphorn is a more worldly man. He's not as associated with the Navajo religion or spirituality as Jim Chee is. I mean, Jim became a Hata'ali. Hopefully I kind of got that right, but Jim is a medicine man as well, and he's very deeply spiritual. And Bernie is too in a certain way, but not as much as Jim. But it's fascinating how that works into the stories. And you see, their philosophy of life and everything. And it's so attractive and it's so full of love and generosity.
Oh. Well, thanks. It's interesting when you're writing a mystery, and I'm sure you know this from your own work. You have the plot that kind of you starts here and ends here, and then you have particularly when you're writing a series, you have all of the other kind of juicy enhancements that you need to put in. I think that's one of the joys of writing a series. You get to not only come up with the murder or the crime and who did it and why, but then what's happening with Bernie and the situation with her mother and what's happening with her wily little sister and what's happening in office and politics and when I started bringing Bernie up as a main crime solver, I think I wasn't really aware of how important the whole fabric of her life would also turn out to be for the mysteries.
Yes. Well, and I think that really adds depth to them, and I very much appreciate the way that you do that. And talking about the setting, one of the questions I was curious about, you talked about plot and the setting, and I want to know, as you write, I mean, do you outline, or are you, like I am, you just start with the idea and then run with it?
Yeah.
And do you know ahead of time what settings you want to use, or you just use the setting as the story develops?
No, I do know the settings. Often I start with the settings. When I became the guardian of these wonderful characters, one thing that was on my mind was that the Navajo Nation offers such wide and varied landscapes that it would be fun to take the readers to places that my dad had not yet written about. So that was one of the things that was on my mind when I thought about Stargazer. And there's the book I did before this, The Tale Teller, talks a lot about the Long Walk, which was the government's failed and misguided attempt to remove the Navajo people from their sacred land and march them down to southern New Mexico and try to turn them into farmers on land that was not ever meant for farming.
No.
Anyway, as part of that, I discovered that there were some Navajo clans that and there are a lot of different stories about this, but they set up their own community outside of the big reservation. And part of that community also involved a connection with Apaches who had been mistreated and kind of settled there. There was a lot of interconnection between the Navajo families and the Apache families. So I thought this is really an interesting part of Navajo history. So I wanted to include that in the book. And luckily for me, about, maybe 45 minutes from that Navajo settlement, there's a wonderful astronomy center called the Very Large Array, where they have these fabulous giant radio telescopes mounted on railroad tracks. And they can arrange them in Y shapes, depending on what part of the galaxy they're listening for signals for. So that setting in itself was just, just full of mystery. I hardly even had to say anything. It's just, it was such a wonderful gift to be able to write about that. And then to have that kind of interlaced with the whole Navajo part of it. So yes, I started with that setting. And then from there, it kind of made sense to figure out who the dead person would be.
Right.
And then the story just kind of unfolded as I worked on it.
Yeah. I usually start with who's going to die. Who do you want to kill? And in this case, it's giving nothing away. I mean, it's the astronomer who works at the VLA, or the Very Large Array, and that's why the book is called Stargazer. And it really is fascinating, because I had no clue about radio telescopes, because these are telescopes that actually listen for radio waves coming from out in the galaxy.
Right.
They're not looking for stars, they're not looking for planets, they're listening to radio waves. Right. And that really, I suppose at some level I must have known that existed, but this really put it front and center, and you explained it well. I almost understood the science. It's complicated.
That's such a challenge. I love doing all that research. And at one point I had to remind myself, no, Anne, you're not writing a book about radio astronomy. You're writing a mystery here. Just focus on the story and kind of use all of this as the spice. But and I'm sure you know yourself, when you're researching something and it fascinates you, it's really hard to pull back and have just enough to just what you need to make the story work, and not so much that people's eyes glaze over.
Right, exactly. Because my rule is if you do a lot of research and you jam every bit of it into the book, then you've obviously gone too far. It's like, I don't know if you ever read The Alienist by Caleb Carr years ago. There was a great story buried in that book. I really need to know the history of Delmonicos to appreciate the book. He knew these cool things and he jammed them in. And I've read other books like that. And
as a writer, I can understand that 100%.
Oh yeah, and in some of my books, I've used sort of different ideas, backgrounds. One had a Civil War kind of connection, and another one was about children's series books, which I happen to know a lot about and stuff. And I could have put so much more in just to show off, well, look, this is something cool I know. But if it doesn't serve the story, it needs to go.
Yeah, that's really true. Well, I hope you noticed that there's a cat in my book.
Oh yes. I can't remember the name at the moment, but it's Louisa's cat.
Louisa, Giddy is its name. Yeah.
Okay, Giddy.
And it's Louisa's cat, but it's kind of adopted Joe now that Louisa is out of the house a lot.
Yes. Well, and let's talk about Joe for a minute. In that very first book, you kind of pulled a mean one on Joe.
I shouldn't laugh. I know I did. It was.
Yeah.
That was the first mystery I'd ever written, and to tell you the honest truth, I was kind of intimidated by old Joe. He was.
He's a tough nut. Yeah.
He was the character with whom my dad had started that series. It was 50 years ago last year.
Yes, and it's hard to believe. Yeah.
And I thought, holy smokes, he's like such a venerable character. I don't know if I can do him justice, but I knew he had to be in the book. And the other thing I thought was, am I a good enough writer for my first novel to have Joe and Jim Chee and Bernie? Can I juggle three main characters? And I thought, I don't know, and I don't want to fall flat. So I figured out, I don't want to say too much in case people have.
No, we don't want to just say that Joe is sort of sidelined for a while.
Joe is sidelined, but he's an important part of the story at the same time.
Oh yes, he very much is. And in Stargazer, there's always something crucial that he comes up with that neither Jim nor Bernie really sees, because he's got that experience that that he sometimes intuits things or he just remembers things.
Yeah.
He had such a long career.
Yeah.
And I think you've balanced that well. Bernie is really our entree into the books, and I think that was a wise choice, honestly. And but I noticed, like in Stargazer, and I was looking back at Rock with Wings, the second book. There are small sections where we're just in Jim's viewpoint while he's working on a case separate from Bernie, and you balance that off, and your dad did that too when they were joined together in a book. So it works. It really works. But Bernie is really the main character.
Yeah.
And we're seeing her grow and change and learn, which is a good thing for a cop. And there's some interesting developments, which we will look forward to in the next book. Have you finished the next book yet?
Yeah, I sent it off to my editor on April Fool's Day. I don't know.
Oh,
I
wow.
hope it's not a bad omen.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah. Anyway, she's read it and she likes it, and she had a couple really good ideas for how to make it better. So I'm excited to get that one, to get back to work on that one. But in the meantime, it's lovely to be talking about Stargazer. It's kind of as a parent, you have a new baby and you're so totally focused on it. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, I have this really sweet toddler here who's just so charming with its little dimples. So anyway, it's lovely to be thinking again about Stargazer.
Yes.
One thing that when I was working on Stargazer, my husband, who was living with dementia, was I was his main caregiver, and normally, he was doing pretty well for somebody with as many problems as he had. But once in a while, he would realize that his memory was failing, or that things were going wrong, and then he would tap his head and he would say, "You got to fix this." And of course, there's, you can't fix it. So right. I would think of, what I would say, oh, sure, we'll get to work on that. I'll do some research. I'll talk to doctors. And all of that kind of made me think about the lies that we tell out of love. And that was one of the themes that kind of helped me think of how the plot would unfold with Stargazer.
Right. Yes. And
that theme, it works with the Bernie plot, but it also really worked with the Joe Leaphorn-Louisa subplot.
Yes.
Because, in that relationship, there are things that have never been said. And I think they kind of come back to give Joe a little trouble in Stargazer. But he works it out okay.
He does. And we're not going to say, what it is, but Joe's very self-contained, very reserved. And he loved Emma, and her loss was extremely painful to him. And I know after a loss like that, you just want to sort of close in on yourself.
Yeah.
And open yourself up to something. And, so that, that was a very painful part of the series when that happened. But Joe is, a man who will, at the end, he will not back down from the challenge. He's made a great recovery from what happened, and he's not gonna. So I'm really curious to see what happens in the next book or two with Joe and Louisa. So because she's a great character, she really is.
I was lucky that my dad had created her and created Bernie, and really not fully developed them, kind of left them as sort of cardboard placeholders. Yeah. So, and not to demean him. My dad really was wonderful writer, but he himself said that writing women characters was not his strong point. So I was lucky when I took over the series that I had so much potential in those two characters to really give them a bigger role in the books. And I hear from readers that they really are enjoying both seeing Bernie kind of come into her power, but also seeing Louisa be more of a person with an interesting personality, and kind of seeing her hold her own with Joe. So
yes, because he's a pretty powerful personality in an understated way, and and I know Jim Chee is still a little shy of him, and because Joe was not always very kind to Jim. He was tough on him, and then I remember, I think it was in Rock with Wings, when Jim was working that other case, he met that female cop officer who Joe had trained. And it was just like working with Joe again. She was one tough lady.
Yeah, maybe worse.
Yeah, probably worse. Yes. But the thing, what you mentioned is the lies we tell for love or whatever. That really is very much at the heart of Stargazer. And I kind of knew that was probably what was going on. Someone was trying to protect somebody else. And I just knew I had figured it out. But no, you managed to, you misdirected me very well. And then finally we see who the villain is. And it's like, I got close, but I didn't get it. So.
Well, I'm honored that I tricked you, because I know you've read a million mysteries. So. Well, it's a funny thing about that. I switched villains about 3/4 of the way through that book, because it dawned on me that the person I had originally thought was the murderer couldn't have done it.
Yeah.
And needless to say, you don't really want to have that happen when you're 3/4 of the way done with your book, because I didn't want to start over. So I had to think about how I could subtly plant a few more clues, so the readers would feel like they actually could have figured it out. So
and I looking back, I saw that, but that happens to me a lot, honestly, in writing, because I come up with the basic idea and the secondary characters that I'm bringing in, with my primary cast, and I will think, okay, this is probably who the killer is going to be, and this is why, but as I write and as I tell myself the story and I see other possibilities, I'll get to a certain point, it's like, oh no, that person can't be the killer, it has to be this other person. And I think that's the subconscious at work.
Yeah.
I think the subconscious pulls those things together for you, because you get so immersed in the story, and you see one level of it, but your subconscious sees another level.
Yeah.
So, I think that's what happens a lot of times.
I agree with that. And you know how writers talk about characters speaking to them, and that's kind of what happened to me in this book, more strongly than it had before. The character who I thought had done it just kind of kept saying, "Wait a minute, look at who I am. Look, think about this a little more."
Yeah.
And meanwhile, there was a minor character who also was saying, "You are underestimating me."
Yeah.
And so, the combination of that steered me on the right track.
Yes. And I kind of think I know where you were originally intending to go, and I think you made the better choice, because that person was not the killer.
And I think it would have been too obvious for the readers too. So
a little bit, yeah. And I was going to be a little disappointed actually if that turned out to be that. Because I really don't try to solve them, to be carried along to the end, so if it's too blatant, I get a little annoyed. So, but you do a really good job. There's a lot of texture to the books, and there are a lot of nuances, and there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, as in this book. I mean, the basic plot is this man wants to get back with his ex-wife. They have a son together, and he's moved to New Mexico in order to facilitate that. And she doesn't want to get back with him. They have a date, and then he's found murdered, and this is the first chapter, so I'm not giving a lot away. He's found murdered in his car on the side of the highway. So, and she says she did it, and so we go from there. And the woman in this case is someone that Bernie went to school with whom she was extremely close. But this woman had a problematic past, and they drifted apart. And now Bernie's trying to solve this case involving her friend, and she's having a hard time because she can't see that her friend would have done this.
Yeah, and because the friend isn't helping her.
Exactly. The friend is stonewalling, And Bernie is still young enough, and I think in some ways immature enough, that she doesn't understand why some of these things happen. She's a very ABC person. And sometimes there's an A and there's like a little A and a big A and a big B and a little B. And, there are all kinds of these little things that weave together. And Bernie's much more direct.
Right.
That's why she gets so impatient with Darlene, her younger sister. Darlene, I think Darlene does try to communicate with her, but Bernie doesn't want to hear what she doesn't want to hear. And that makes it very human, I think. And that's part of the appeal, So how old is Bernie? Yeah, she's in her 20s, I would say.
I think she's early 30s.
Early 30s? Okay.
Early 30s now.
Yeah, it's hard to judge there.
That's the good thing about fictional characters. I mean, thinking about Joe Leaphorn, having his first case 50 years ago, he would be a little long in the tooth to be still an active law enforcement guy. But
yes, well, at least
we don't have to age them in real time. So
exactly, yes, because Hercule Poirot would have been 121, I think, by the time his career ended. So, but honestly, I don't think readers really mind that. They when they find characters they love, they want them to go on forever.
I think so too. I haven't heard any complaints that Joe Leaphorn is getting too old.
Yeah. And frankly, if you want that kind of realism in your books, then you need to read true crime. Frankly, one of the reasons I read fiction is because I want to go somewhere other than where I am. Like I did with your books and your dad's, I wanted to go to New Mexico when I couldn't afford to get there any other way. And I want those characters to be my guides. And you could be writing the books 50 years from now, and if I were still around, I'd still be reading them because I still want to know what's going on. And I think that's the appeal of a series.
Yeah, I do too. And I think the other appeal of fiction is that besides the story, you get to learn something that you probably didn't even know that you didn't know. Yeah. And if you're in the hands of a good writer, also something that you didn't realize you were interested in. But a good writer can present it in such a way that you think, oh yeah, maybe I am interested in black holes or a radio telescope. So that's I think our challenge as a writer to take those little tidbits and sprinkle them in and have the readers go, not only did I get a good story, but my brain has expanded because of reading this.
Yes. Well, I would have thought I would be all that interested in radio telescopes, but now I'm curious. So when I do get to New Mexico and I'm determined to get there, I would be kind of curious to see this place.
Yeah, well, and they do wonderful public tours. Yeah. I mean, and they do them on a level probably for about junior high science. So
that would work.
And then, of course, you could, the scientists are there, so anybody who has more profound questions can certainly ask them. But the whole idea is that science is a gift to everybody, and there's no reason to be intimidated by it. So
yeah. Well, and one thing that just occurred to me with this book is that with the telescopes, they're listening for communication from outer space. And they hear radio, they get radio waves. It's like, how do we know where this comes from? Da, da, da. And that's basically kind of what a detective does. Yeah. These impulses, these echoes from things, and how do we interpret them? How do we know where they come from? What do they mean? So that may be stretching it a little bit, but still, it's
I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
The other thing that they do at the Very Large Array, they're in collaboration with, I think it's called SETI, SETI, the group
Yes.
that's listening for life in outer space, signals from other sentient beings. So I wasn't able to really bring that into the book, but it fascinated me. That was one of the things that didn't make it. But
right. But I recognize the acronym. I think it stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, maybe.
I think I think that's right.
But I recognize that, and that was like, oh, okay, I know what that is anyway. So
yeah.
Okay, so we talked about how the setting connects with the stories. You also have a variety of both. I was trying to remember the Navajo word for not Navajo. Dilagana? Yeah. Dilagana, yes. And integrating them with the Navajo. And there's also, a range of Navajo, because we see the poverty, we see the alcoholism, we see things happening to them. And it's hard, it's hard to believe that this is still going on in this day and age. They're still that poor that we're allowing this to happen. It's just beyond belief.
Yeah. On the other hand, though, there also are professional people. There's a Navajo principal, a Navajo coach. Lots of it's not all gloom and doom.
No.
Tremendous respect for the resilience of the Navajo people and their enormous respect for education, and how that's really is part of the cultural fiber. Very encouraging of their children to get an education, to go to college. And now the Navajo Nation has a lot of colleges, both run by institutions in New Mexico and Arizona, or run by the Navajo Nation itself. So it's an interesting contrast that there's so much poverty, and then there are Navajo lawyers, Navajo doctors, a lot of Navajo people who come back to the Navajo Nation with the very idea of helping their people rise up and be as best as they can be.
Yeah, well, the people themselves are a testament to their resilience, because it's a harsh land. It's not easy to live there.
Absolutely. And the whole pandemic just ravaged the Navajo Nation too.
Yes.
And they were, President Nez closed it down. They were very, very conscientious about quarantines, about not letting outsiders who could bring in the disease be there. And I think this is the 10th day in a row when there have been no deaths from COVID on the Navajo Nation. So their plan is really working.
That's wonderful. It shows what people need to be doing. Sadly, but it's interesting. I was looking because I just had vague notions of how the Navajo Nation. I knew it was northern New Mexico and northern Arizona, but I was looking at it, and most of it's in Arizona.
Yeah.
And then within the Navajo Nation is also the Hopi. The map I saw, there's a little, basically square of the Hopi, which is, I guess, is their homeland. Are they Athabascan like the Navajo, or?
No, the Hopi are totally different. Their ancestors were Pueblo people. They have more ties to the Rio Grande Pueblo people in New Mexico, and also some of the Pueblo people who are in Arizona. No, the Hopi are very, very different than the Navajo. It's like a little island of Hopi culture surrounded by the Navajo.
Okay. Yeah, because I think I may have known that at one point, but when I was looking at the map, it's like, oh, okay, here they are. Did they interact that much, or are their relationships good?
Oh, I think like any human relationships, there's good, and then there's some friction.
Yeah, well, yes, especially when cultures are particularly different. So, one of the things that you do in the books, you include some Navajo vocabulary at the back of the book, so people can pick up words. But I've been trying to find pronunciation guides to Navajo on the web, and I haven't really found one that's really consistently helpful. So for our next book, maybe give a few tips on how to pronounce things.
Oh, good idea.
Yeah, because I'm one of those people, if I'm reading something, I want to know how to say things. I don't want to just have some garbled sound in my head when I see this word. So I always, it's like when I was younger, before I had studied any foreign languages, it always drove me crazy if somebody, like when Agatha Christie or Dorothy Sayers would pop in French before I learned anything of French, I always want to know, and names are fascinating to me too. So I always want to know the derivation of the names. And the Navajo have their name for themselves, I know translates as the people. But is it what, Dine?
Dine.
Dine.
Dineta is the Navajo word for Navajo land.
Okay, Dineta. Okay. Yeah. That's one of the things I love, another aspect of these books is learning these bits of the culture. And as I said earlier, one of the things I find really attractive about these people is their spirituality and their connection to the land. My family have been farmers going back many generations, back to England. And I know your ancestors were English and German. And, so I understand that connection to the land, even though I did not become a farmer like the generations before me. I understand the connection. And that's something I find, it's easy to understand, and to me, it's very attractive. And their whole religion and their way of life is bound up in their respect for the land.
It's interesting. I think people who are used to, say, all the beautiful green that you see in Houston or you see in the South, often when they come to the Southwest, it takes them a while to see the beauty in sort of in the rocks, in the desert plants that have such a struggle to make it, in the huge. I think a lot of times they're a little bit intimidated by the expansive sky and the terrifically fierce weather that we have out here. To the people who live out here, we see the beauty in it. And I think particularly it's true of people like the Navajo people and the Pueblo people and the Zuni and the Paiutes and the Hopi, all those people whose, generation after generation after generation have been here. And a lot of the stories that talk about their origins also talk about the land itself. I think it's such a gift to anyone who lives in the Southwest to be able to kind of rub shoulders with these cultures and be able to see this landscape through their eyes.
Yeah. Well, those are the kind of connections that most of us have lost over time.
Yeah.
We don't have those connections to the land and the continual story of the land and the family connection to it. And the other thing I think too is, the landscape can intimidate the heck out of you because you see how vast it is. And here you are, this little tiny, tiny thing in this vast landscape. And that probably terrifies some people.
Yeah. Well, and I think, for good reason. If you're stuck in a sandstorm or stuck in a blizzard, you could die. It's not like your cell phone is going to work to call 911 or to call AAA. A lot of places are so isolated that you really have to look out for yourself. And I think the other thing that this kind of brings to the foreground is the value of community. Fact, you maybe you're out in the middle of nowhere, but your cousin lives somewhere and your cousin knew you were going, and chances are he has a pickup that can handle those roads, and he'll come to look for you. So it's really a whole different way of looking at the world. And I feel so honored to be able to include some of this in my books.
Well, you do it well, and I think you give people an entree to this culture and to these people, which is truly wonderful. You continue your father's legacy in a very special.
Listen, before we run out of time, talk a little bit about what your new book is.
Oh, okay. Well, the next one is called What the Cat Dragged In. And in this one, it deals a little bit with my main character's family history. He discovers that he has inherited his grandfather's farmhouse, which he thought went out of the family. And he goes there to look at it. He hadn't been there since he was about 6 years old, and he's now early 50s. And he takes, of course, his main cat. He has a Maine Coon cat named Diesel who goes everywhere with him. And they go to examine the house, and they eventually end up in the attic. And Charlie hears a thunk, thunk, thunk in the attic, and he finds that Diesel has opened a cabinet, an old wardrobe, and a skull comes bouncing out. And there's a skeleton that goes with the skull. Charlie's wondering, okay, did my grandfather put somebody in the attic and leave them there? Or was it the person who owned the house after my grandfather? You know, where did this body come from? Who is it? Who was this, a victim of murder? You know, whatever. And then there are other things that happen, but that was the starting point. And that was my idea. And then I had to figure out what the rest of the book was going to be. and that's how I start. You know,
I'm hooked. Yeah.
You know, I have to tell myself the story so I can tell it to everybody else. So
Yeah.
I can't outline, because if I did that, then I wouldn't want to write the book.
I feel the same way. Although sometimes I get to a point where I'm secretly jealous of those people who can do outlines. I think it would be awfully nice to not have to think so hard here, to just have to go back to the outline and know what happened.
Well, what I do a lot of times when I get about, you know, a little over halfway, maybe close to 2/3, is I'll write down plot points on an index card. And this needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. And then I can sort of look at the logical sequence, because I have to write from, you know, point A to B to C to D to E. I'm very linear. You know, I have a friend who can skip around, and I just can't do that. You know, so, and I have a feeling you're a very linear writer too.
I'm pretty linear. Sometimes I get circular, which doesn't serve me well. Sometimes I end up in cul-de-sacs, but I try to be linear.
Yes, well, I mean, but you can discover interesting things in cul-de-sacs, right? You never know.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I wonder, maybe it's time to bring back John and find out if we have any questions from our audience. There he is.
Hi, John.
Hello. So we do have a queue. So I have one for you, Anne. So when you decided that you were going to take over the series, I know you said that you felt like you had kind of grown up with these characters. Did you go back and reread the books in the series, or do you just kind of dip into them as you need info for the one you're working?
Oh, you know, I was really, really lucky in that regard. That nonfiction book that I had done required me, or invited me, I guess I should say, to reread all of Dad's books. So I had just finished reading all 19 of them when maybe a year before I started working on Spider-Woman's Daughter. So yeah, that really, really helped me. It kind of gave me better, it reintroduced me to the quirks of Joe Leaphorn and Jim Chee and Leaphorn-Chee-Manuelito, and also to the way that Dad described scenery, to his pacing, to all of that. So yeah, that was really, really a help. Now I don't reread them so much unless well, for Stargazer, I brought back a character who Dad had used in Listening Woman. So I reread Listening Woman because I wanted to be sure that I got her right. But normally I don't anymore. I guess unless I'm just feeling kind of nostalgic, and then I might pick up Thief of Time or Skinwalker, one of my very favorites, and spend some time with them.
Okay, so Susan commented early on Dean that she got a Maine Coon cat because of Diesel. And she wants to know, and are Joe and Jim based on any real people that you or your father knew?
Sort of. They're both composites of different people that we've come across in life. When my dad created Joe, he had been working as a police reporter for a little town called Borger in Texas, and the sheriff in that town, I think inspired Joe Leaphorn. I remember Dad saying that he was one of these guys who understood the law, but also understood compassion, and kind of walked that line between being a hard-nosed cop and being somebody who could look the other way, or let kindness overcome his sense of having to enforce the law if that would lead to a better outcome. And then Dad created Jim Chee actually because he had a very incompetent agent who had sold the rights to Joe Leaphorn to this movie company in Los Angeles that actually was not ever going to make a movie about that had Joe Leaphorn featured in it. But Dad didn't want to write any more Joe Leaphorn books until he got that all straightened out. And also, I think he'd written maybe 3 or 4 Joe Leaphorn books, and he realized that it would be nice to have a younger character, and to have a character who was closer to the Navajo culture. Whereas Joe had gone to University of Arizona, he was a little more acculturated. So he wanted to bring in somebody to kind of balance that. So that was the origin of Jim Chee. And I think Bernie was based a little bit on my mother because of her interest in botany. My mom was a master gardener. My mom was one of those people who could look out the window if you're going down the road at 30 miles an hour and say, oh yeah, look at that plant, it's a such and such. And it wouldn't normally grow here, but because of the runoff from the road, it's doing fine. So I think my mom in a way inspired Bernie, even though my mom had nothing to do with law enforcement.
And so, Dean, I know the answer to, or I know that, some of your murder victims have been inspired by people that you know, but have you based any of your other characters on people that you know?
Yeah, I've actually put real people in the books. The Ducote sisters are based on two real sisters, and I use their actual names. But the real sisters are much younger, both married with children, and one of them has a grandchild now. But I like to drop in names of real people occasionally. And I also like to put in little hints about people. For example, the bookseller in the little town where Charlie lives, it's named for both David and McKenna, Jordan Thompson, stuff. So I do things like that. It's, it's fun for me, and it's a way to, to tell people that, you're thinking of them and everything. And of course, there are some friends I wouldn't dare put in the book because, they'd not be happy at all with no matter what I did. I could make them saints and I still wouldn't be happy. So.
In Stargazer, the New Mexico Children's Foundation asked me if I would donate the naming of a character to somebody who would bid on it at an auction. And I had never done that, but I thought, well, I'll try it. So this gentleman named Joe DeLissa, who was a physician who had done a lot of work with kids, was the one who bought the naming rights. And he said, oh, I'm so excited because I've always loved Joe Leaphorn. So in the book, I was able to use Joel's name for a character who actually gets to hold hands with Joe Leaphorn. So Joel was happy, and I was happy that it worked out that way.
Yeah, and it's for a good cause.
Yeah, exactly.
When we talked with JT Ellison, a month or so ago, when her new book came out, she had done one of those auctions, and the auction was specifically for people to die in a book. And so they were talking during the talk, and somebody mentioned like, oh, there's a really high body count in this book. And she's like, I had to have one. I auctioned off all these names. So like I had to keep killing all of these people to keep up with it.
Okay, that's one way to do it.
So Anne, when you are not writing, what do you read for pleasure? Do you read mysteries? Do you read outside of the genre? If you want to pick up something for pleasure, what are you reading?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I do read. I read a lot of nonfiction that has to do with Southwest geology, Southwest history, with Navajo culture. There's a wonderful, and I think wonderful, I haven't read it yet, but an anthology of young Navajo writers that's coming out. I think it's coming out this week that I just learned about, so I'm going to read that. And yeah, I love to read mysteries. I get a lot of books by beginning. I shouldn't say beginning. Books by writers who are publishing first novels, and they ask me if I would give them a little endorsement. And it's fun to read those. A lot of them are people who really have a lot of talent, and for me it's exciting to come across somebody with a new idea or a new voice. So I enjoy reading those. One of those people is a writer named Chris Kelsey, who his stories are based in Oklahoma. And his sheriff is a guy who also he's kind of one of these troubled guys who drinks a little too much, but he's got a very strong moral compass, and he loves to listen to jazz. And Chris Kelsey is just a fine writer, and I never would have come across him if it hadn't been for his agent or somebody asking me if I would give his book a little blurb. So I have fun doing that. The bad thing about being a writer is that I find I don't have as much time to read as I would like, because I'm so busy reading and rereading my own darn stuff.
Yeah, I just got back the first pass pages for the book that comes out in August, so I've got to read it yet again. You get thoroughly sick of them after a while.
And don't you find that you get more and more self-critical?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I could have done this instead. Why didn't I do that?
Right. It's hard.
Too late.
It's hard to think I'll just have to do better in the next book.
Yeah. The next book is always going to be the perfect one.
Right.
And how about you, Dean? Obviously I know your reading taste because I was just looking at your list of stuff that I need to send you. But if you're working on writing a book, are you reading in the mystery genre, or is that when you pick up something else to read?
Well, I do still read mysteries, but I'm more likely to read a golden age, classic English detective story, partly because of the structure and the plotting helps me. Because Agatha Christie is one of my role models. But I also read nonfiction. I've been reading a biography of Henry Adams, the grandson and great-grandson of presidents. He was a very famous figure in his own right. And I also read a fascinating book recently on the Vikings and exploring their connections to the East. And of course, I'm a medievalist by training, and so I love history of various periods. And I'm also fascinated by ancient hominins and things. So I'm pretty eclectic. And I've been listening to a lot of books lately too. I've been listening to Deanna Raybourn's Veronica Speedwell series. I'm about the point where I want to just bat Veronica over the head, but I've found that I used to not think I would ever enjoy audiobooks, but they help me control my road rage when I'm driving back and forth to work.
So Stargazer has just come out. Can you give anybody a little bit of teaser what might be next? Have you started on the next book in the series?
Actually, I just submitted it to my editor April 1st. It's a book in which Jim Chee is the lead detective, and it's set in the part of the Navajo Nation that's near Lake Powell. One of the scenes takes place in Antelope Canyon, which is run by the Navajo Nation. It deals with Rainbow Bridge, which is a sacred site to the Navajo and the Hopi and the Paiute, a lot of the tribes that are on the Colorado Plateau. Some of the story involves the archaeology of Lake Powell that was basically merged when Lake Powell was created. A lot of the settlements that were in Glen Canyon and around there. So yeah, and then the Bernie story is kind of the subplot, and that involves cannabis production on the Navajo Nation. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with that. And as we were saying earlier, this was another case where the research was just I found it so fascinating, learning so much about the archaeology of Lake Powell and the whole construction of that big dam and all the controversies. And anyway, I tried to not turn it into a treaty on environmental degradation in Lake Powell, but it was fun, and I'm curious to see what my editor thinks about it. You know, these New Yorkers don't always have the same perspective that we have in the West, so fingers crossed people like it.
Yeah. Well, you know, there was that famous story, which may be apocryphal, that one of the editors who read your father's first book said, you know, this would be good if you get rid of the Indians. It's like, you know, you totally missed the point of the book, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to say before we have to end this, there's a new biography of my dad, or a biography of my dad that University of Oklahoma Press is publishing. It'll be out in October. And it's
cool.
By the author James McGrath Morris, who's done a lot of really good biographies. And he did wonderful research, and he gives my mom a lot of credit, which really, really made me happy. So you readers who love Dad's mysteries might want to look for that.
Yes, very much so.
So so it's called Tony Hillerman, A Life. And if anybody's interested in pre-ordering it, I am dropping a link to the book from the Murder by the Book website in the comments. So you've got the info right there in front of you if you guys want to check that out. Also wanted to mention before we head out, I mentioned it at the beginning, but we are going to either be sending Dean books, or he's going to be coming visiting us. It just kind of, there's a lot of factors. We're kind of early stages, but if you want to pre-order copies of What the Cat Dragged In, you can pre-order those on the Murder by the Book website. I also dropped a link to that. He's going to sign a personalized sports like he did last year. In Hillerman's new book, Stargazer, is out. We've got it in store if you want to start with Spider-Woman's Daughter, the first in the series. We've got that as well. So we hope you guys will check those out, as well as the original Tony Hillerman series. Like I said, we're open, so you can come in and visit us, or we're happy to run books out to your car for curbside pickup. If you guys missed any part of the chat, once we are done, YouTube and Facebook will archive it, so you'll be able to rewatch it. If you have not spent some time on our YouTube channel or on Facebook, we have hosted over 200 author events with over 350 authors since this time last year. So there is a wealth of content out there. Any subgenre, pretty much any mystery author that you want to hear from, they're all out there. We hope you guys will check those out. There's some really great stuff there. We've loved being able to do these virtual events. So if you guys will check them out. Dean, thank you again so much for agreeing to do this with us tonight. And
it's my great pleasure. And just one more quick word to those of you out there listening. If you have not read Tony and Anne, it's time you did. They're great books, so get busy. And
I would say the same if you haven't read Miranda James.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne.
And Anne, it was so good to get to connect with you and to see you again. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Oh, my pleasure, John. Thank you for having me. And thanks to everybody who's listening to us, too.
Yes, very much so.
Everybody take care, and we will see you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.